welcome to Focus on Parenting. My name is Diane Garcia, and I am the Children's Librarian at the Los Feliz Branch Library of the Los Angeles Public Library. My pronouns are she and her. I have worked with children for about a dozen years and recently became a first-time parent. So we are excited to offer this program as part of the Los Angeles Public Library's Focus on Parenting series. We hope this dialogue provides tools that families can use in daily life to actively create an equitable and inclusive world. The joys and challenges of parenting are amplified by living through a pandemic, along with an important moment of social justice reawakening. These twin dynamics are unlike any in recent history, and many families are taking the time to reflect, search for ways to positively change the world, and do the hard work of learning and unlearning that is involved with those goals. So we're excited to discuss the ABCs of diversity with the authors, Dr. Y. Joy Harris-Smith and Dr. Carolyn B. Helsel. Their book is a guide that gives kids and their caregivers opportunities to thoughtfully engage with topics that range from gender identity and sexual orientation to religious and racial diversity, and it even dives into social media. The book uses the ABCs to help us embrace our differences both within and outside of ourselves. So welcome. I want to say welcome to Dr. Y. Joy Harris-Smith and Dr. Carolyn B. Helsel.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes. I'll just give a quick introduction to their backgrounds. Dr. Y. Joy Harris-Smith received her PhD from Howard University in Communication and Culture. She is a trained New York City special education teacher with more than 17 years of experience. Joy is a mom of a first grader and a kindergartner and enjoys road trips and traveling outside of the country as a family. And their last trip was a trip to Bermuda to visit family and friends. Dr. Carolyn B. Helsel has led workshops for the White Privilege Conference, authored Preaching About Racism and Anxious to Talk About It, and teaches at the Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. She is the mother of two adolescents, a 10-year-old voracious reader who loves libraries, and a 14-year-old who loves birding. She is also the caretaker of 4 chickens, who her kids say also are her beloved children. So thank you so much for joining us today to talk to families about these important topics. And I'd like to open up with you two explaining about your book, The ABCs of Diversity.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us. Joy and I spoke earlier about how we would start this off. So I'm going to go first to share just a little bit about how this book came to be. As you mentioned, I'd authored a couple of books about racism, and when talking about it with groups of adults, often would get the question, how do we start these conversations with our kids? And it's such an important conversation. And I was also starting to think, as my kids are getting older, thinking about how do I have other hard conversations as well as about race, but also about sexual orientation and gender identity so that my kids are already okay with who they are okay with who their friends are, and can be kind of those ambassadors of diversity and inclusion in their schools. So I wanted to write this book as a way of kind of helping me in my own parenting. And Joy and I know each other from having gone crossed paths in seminary. And when I heard she had all of these years of teaching experience, and as a Black mom with younger kids than mine, I felt like she had the background more recently of like what it's like to raise really small children and having these tough conversations. So we've gotten together over Zoom, and I got to fly up in September, long before the pandemic, that seems like so long ago, to be able to be with you in your home, Joy. It was so delightful. And to get to have these conversations together about how do we help our kids understand diversity. So I'm going to pass it over to you now, Joy.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for having us. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the framework of our book so that for those people who are trying to decide whether or not you're going to add it to your library, you should. So if Katie wouldn't mind sharing, I'm going to talk about the first set of ABCs. ABCs are like a building block. They're foundational. The first one is called the automatic ABCs. And the automatic ABCs stands for afraid, right? And so it asks you to think about, if you're afraid, what makes you afraid in a particular space or situation. The B stands for back away. We forget often that the emotions that we feel surrounding sort of all the things that are going on, we experience them in our bodies. So if you notice yourself physically wanting to back away, start to ask yourself why. Think about what it is that's causing you to sort of wanting to withdraw. And then the C stands for control. Sometimes a response to, situations that are uncomfortable, we try to direct them, try to somehow assert authority or be in charge. And so, again, these are automatic, but they're unhelpful. They don't help us sort of sort through the issue that's at hand. And so that's the first set of ABCs, and it's about noticing within yourself and within your body sort of what's going on for you. The second set of ABCs are the intentional ABCs. The A stands for acknowledge. What happens when you acknowledge the diversity around you? So just taking note, taking stock. Does it cost you anything to just acknowledge that people are present, that there are differences present? And then the B stands for be present. To sit sometimes even with the uncomfortability that might arise, especially if you're used to sort of not being someone who, having privilege, or not, having to deal with challenges that others might. And then the C stands for come closer. In what way could you physically come closer to someone and begin a conversation? So it's the beginnings of personal introspection, trying to get people to think about how they might be a bridge. And it's sort of inching them from the first set of ABCs that were unhelpful, but the beginning was to acknowledge it. And then the second one goes, okay, now that I've acknowledged it, what can I do to begin to move forward? And then the third is the interpersonal ABCs. And this is about moving outward, outward into the world. And the A stands for access. So, what information, what resources do you have at your disposal? What relationships? A lot of times people forget that they have connections or access to people and things that they can utilize to assist others. B stands for build. How can you build upon what you already know? Um, there are people who thrive as connectors, right? They connect people who should be together to work on various projects, or having good conversation, or have interest in the same things. There are all these online communities, but this is about building upon that, developing a deeper connection. And then the C stands for cultivate. Thinking about how you can enrich other people by accessing the information, contributing, or developing a deeper connection, and then continuing to develop yourself and the people around you, perhaps in a particular area, on a particular topic, on a particular subject, or even with resources such as a webinar like this. So these are sort of the building blocks that help people to move from the personal, outward and into society. We can't teach children what we have not done ourselves, and that's sort of where I believe Carolyn and I have, really come together on. We can't give people what we don't know, and we can't give our children what we don't know. So this helps adults begin to think through these. And it also is helpful too, I think, to begin to help children think through how they might become more inclusive.
Mhm.
Thank you for that overview, and those worksheets are really, really great.
Yeah.
If you're watching and you have some questions as well, feel free to put those in the comments, and we'll try and get to them as we go through the program and we have a discussion. So feel free to ask some questions while we're talking to, if anything pops out at you. Early on in the book, there was mention that some of the topics and conversations and emotions that come up when addressing the language of difference can be both potentially awkward and uncomfortable. Can you point to an experience while writing the book during which this was particularly true? Either of you?
Can you just say that last part again? Because my little one came in and was literally talking to me.
So in the book, there's discussion about addressing the language of difference can be potentially awkward and uncomfortable. Can you point to an experience while writing the book during which this was particularly true?
Right, while writing the book.
Yeah.
I think I have I'm trying to think about which of the stories would be most poignant to tell now. I'm trying to think of which is the best story, the best story to tell. I mean, I can tell you an awkward moment that I had. We were coming, we had gotten on the elevator, and a neighbor, somebody who I don't see regularly, I don't know them, but they are on the elevator, and we get off on the first floor, and so we get to the door, and you have a feeling that the kid is going to say something. And they're at the age where the filters are not in place, not completely. And so I'm looking for my key because I can tell it's coming, and for some reason the elevator door is not closing fast enough at the door, and my son asked very very bluntly, so mommy, is that a boy or a girl? And I was like, okay. And I, at first it was just like, okay, awkward moment. How are we going to handle this? Because the elevator door has not closed yet. And so I look at him, and I'm still trying to jiggle with my keys, and the elevator door starts to close, and he asked the question again. And so I asked him, I said, well, what do you think? And so he tells me what he thinks. And it was a good opportunity for me to get a sense of what he knew, right? Of what he understood, and how he deduced who he thought this person was. And after he told me, I said, okay. I said, well, I think that you're right. But, the most important thing is that they were being neighborly. They spoke. They said hello, and we spoke back. And so it was an awkward moment for me because, I didn't know. I thought it might be a female, but I wasn't sure, in all honesty. And so it was, I guess in some ways it was a legitimate question, because he's learned certain things about male and female. And so he was like, this doesn't seem to add up the way that I've always known. So it was an awkward moment, but it was a moment that I kind of was like, okay, this can either be a real disaster or this can be a really great moment, both for him. And then I was thinking about myself too. So I was like, well, what does he know? How does he come to that determination, and what's his thought process? So it was a good opportunity and experience for me to go, my kid is my kid is paying attention. He sees things, he's learning things. And that all children are taking in the world around them, and processing it. So it was an awkward moment, but I caught myself in part being an educator and having had lots of awkward moments, and caught myself and really kind of turned the situation so that I also didn't want to give him misinformation because I didn't know for sure. Um, so I did, what a good teacher does is I get the student to think about it, and tell me what you think. And I'm, oh, okay, that's plausible and that works. And it was good for me and him. But yeah, that was, the elevator door was real slow that day.
Thank you for sharing that. How about you, Carolyn? Did you have any awkward moments or things that you had to face while writing the book?
Well, this is going to maybe put Joy on the spot a little bit, but we had this wonderful encounter. I say wonderful now, but at some point in the process, we're communicating long distance. We're doing stuff by email. We've got a publisher that has a very great marketing person who is really has a lot, sends a lot of emails to us about different deadlines and different requests. And at some point, like, I was responding to the emails, and sometimes there might be multiple back and forths before Joy had a chance to jump in. And I got this voice memo one night from Joy just being like, I feel a certain way about how things are going down. I don't want you to call me about it. I don't want to talk about it right now, but I just want you to, I feel a certain way about it. And it was this gift to me of of her just calling out something that she was seeing, like me and my anxiety responding to the marketing person's anxiety and having to go back and, expecting Joy to have the same timeline, and for her to be able to share with me, that she was uncomfortable with the way things were going, and also to model how to be able to share that without without maybe endangering yourself more, Joy, in the sense of like saying, I need my own space. I don't want you to try to process this with me. Like, I don't want to talk about it. Don't call me back. Like, I just need a few things. Like, it was just a beautiful model. And I'm like, it was so helpful for me to say, here's how you say something like, this bothered me. I don't want you to talk about it with me, but I just want you to know that it's there. And it was beautiful. I think I sent a follow-up email like a day later, just saying like, thank you for that. I'm sorry. I apologize. We're going to do something different moving forward. I didn't have to go all like, I'm a good white person, please. I try to be good. Like, I don't, I didn't need to do all that, but I just had to be like, yeah, wow. Okay. I see how we were responding in a way that wasn't respectful of you as a full co-author and like needing your say in this. And, so that was just a beautiful moment for me. So in talking about the ABCs of diversity, of having to like really model that, okay, when people call us on things, again, do we have those automatic, like, afraid, what does this mean about me? Am I a bad person? Or, or back away, or feel like, well, I'm not going to communicate. There's different ways that we try to control, again, that situation. But just being able to accept and be present, like, oh, I'm sorry that this has felt this way for her, and I feel bad, but I understand, it's not about me, it's about the process. And ultimately, we're going to have a great product going forward as we are patient with one another and understand the dynamics might need to be adjusted. So that was an awkward moment that was actually this wonderful gift. So Joy, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much by calling you out as being this great role model for me, but I appreciate that.
I think one of the things too, if I can just kind of highlight, I mean, even just in Carolyn sharing that, is that it's something that we as, human beings need to do more of. And I think it's that, we can get so kind of caught up in our feelings where we don't take the time to kind of say, okay, this is not about me being a horrible individual. It's about learning how to communicate with somebody. And I just went through that even with my son's teacher. And, And we were able to like just kind of like talk it out, and I learned something. And was it uncomfortable at first? Yeah, because I had some stuff in my head, and I was just like, I really this can't be happening. And then she was able to kind of help me understand kind of what she was actually thinking. And she was, she had mentioned something about being embarrassed, and I was like, oh my God, like you know. And so it wasn't even sort of anything what I thought. But I was like, because it's my kid's teacher, I was like, we got to have a good relationship. We have to. I mean, I tell my students, like, this year we're in a relationship. So just like, you don't have to talk to me after, but for this year, we're in a relationship. So it's being patient with one another and spending the time. And if we don't do those things as adults, it doesn't matter what we teach our kids explicitly, they're going to see us not being patient, and those are the lessons they're going to actually end up taking with them.
Right. And I like how you both you mentioned all, the first set of ABCs where nobody's ever going to get fully away from that. You're always going to, it's a circle that you're always going to have to come back to in every new situation, and try and work your way past that. So my question is, what, or if you have any kind of, I know there's not a one trick kind of thing to get you out of that every time, but what do you think is maybe something that holds people back the most from going forward to the more intentional ABCs, and kind of gets them stuck in the first set of ABCs?
That's a good question.
I think the fear of saying the wrong thing, the fear of offending someone else, and you may not even be aware of that fear, but it's just a little bit of fear under the surface that, again, prevents you from having that warmth, that sense of groundedness, that sense of being able to be fully present with one another. So I, just ran into a friend of mine that I know, kind of casually. We were part of a book group together, and she has a name that is harder for me to pronounce, and she speaks with a little bit of an accent. And I remember thinking at one point in the conversation that I was anxious. And this is a person that I've been around plenty, but I had that bit of fear, and I had to just be like, what's going on? What am I afraid of? And I was afraid, did I say her name right? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Or, and I realized part of it was, am I able to understand her with the accent? Or, there's all sorts of fears that we have that unless we pay attention and we say, oh, sometimes people speak in accents that might be hard for us to understand, but then we can just ask them to follow up and we're still in conversation. But just, again, normalizing those initial reactions so that they don't get us stuck. Because those feelings of social awkwardness, or, I'm not going to be politically correct, all of those fears, again, keep us in our lanes, keep us with people that look just like us and sound just like us. And so it's really important, again, that we acknowledge those fears and normalize them and say, this is okay. I see what is going on in me. And now I can take that deep breath and just be fully present with my friend who I know here, and learn, what's going on in her life and hear what they did last summer. So those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I agree definitely with Carolyn that it's fear. And I also think sometimes people don't stop to even, they're not cognizant of they don't stop and pause and just say what's going on. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times people miss it. And I think they miss it because they don't stop to go, okay, what's going on here? That's really sort of, if there's a step, that's the first one. Like, you have to ask what's going on here. So the story that I mentioned with my son, as soon as I felt myself go, oh, it was like, okay, so what's going on here? They've asked a question that I don't know the answer to. And how I respond is going to be important. So what can I do? And so that's, but I have to say what's going on here. So that's step one. If anybody's listening, ask yourself what's going on.
Thank you. So we have a question from a viewer, Sarah Garcia. She is asking, is there an intended age range, and how can this be integrated across developmental stages?
Sarah sounds like somebody's teacher. So I think that, just like education, every kid is going to move at a different rate and a different pace. I think in our book we share, Carolyn has been great with putting together a number of resources. And I'm sure that there are tons of blogs with lists upon lists upon lists upon lists of books that you can use. I think what's most important is to start somewhere and kind of see, it'll be through conversation. I mean, there's no real prescribed, method. Talking with a 2-year-old, it's going to be very different when you talk to a 4-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, because they are developmentally different. I just think that it's important to if you're asking about how to build their schema, how to build it, it becomes exposing them to different places and people and situations. And so some of those things can be done with books. Some of those can be done in concrete, spaces, learning environments. So I just think, if you're talking as a parent, I think that parents just have to be intentional about exposing their children to different people and to different places and spaces. And in addition, you do the books and the videos and all of those other things. But it's a journey, so it's not like it's going to be a one, thing. It's going to take time. And you're also going to see what questions your kids have, because different situations will call for you to address them, sort of as they arise. So I don't know if that helps or answers your question, but
well, and I would answer in case you're asking about our particular book. The ABCs is really a book written to grown-ups to help adults process their own comfort level with diversity, so that they can have these conversations with their kids. Because it really does. It starts with us. I kept hearing when I was talking with groups of people, well, aren't our kids so much better at diversity than we are? I'd have people stand up and say, isn't this something that the next generation is going to take care of for us? Basically, they're asking about racism particularly, but diversity more general, because they're saying, my kids have Black friends, and it just seems like they're so much more comfortable hanging out with people who are different from them. And I was surprised to have those kinds of questions, because these questions were coming after the Charlottesville 2017 march, where you see all these young men, that are college age, late teenagers, who are, shouting blood and soil, this anti-Semitic, racist, all of these chants. It's like, these are young people. This is the next generation too. It's not just the folks who are, having a diverse group of friends. So it's our job now, whatever age we are, to be having these conversations. So even if you don't have kids of your own that are little, if you have kids that are in their adult years, it's important to be talking about this with your children. It's important to be talking about this with your parents and grandparents. But you'd be surprised at how many grandparents are already on board with so many different levels of diversity. I've been impressed by the folks who I've seen in this journey for a long time. And also, there's also people doing this in education in unique ways. In the bibliography of our book, I point to Louise Dearman Sparks and Julie Olson's Olson Edwards' book, Anti-Bias Education for Young Children and Ourselves. So that starts really early, with preschool or talking about fairness. They may not understand bias, but that we can introduce concepts about fairness so that they are aware, and you're able to talk about some of the history in fairness terms so that kids have a context for knowing why it's not okay to say certain things, and why it's important for us to talk about all our skin colors in positive ways, and to notice these differences in ways that normalize them and make kids feel comfortable talking about them.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So this is a question about parenting also in a pandemic. So it's kind of harder to go in public spaces where there are a number of people, engaging in kind of celebratory things. Like I'm thinking of like something that maybe a lot of different cultures went to in Los Angeles was like the Lotus Festival or the Moon Festival. And those were free events that everybody could go to, and cultural events that different people celebrated. And so I guess I'm asking, what do you think is a good way to expose children to different cultures and different ethnicities? We know books are important, but if we can't actually get out there and be with people as much as you want to be, maybe people have different health issues they're worrying about. Do you have any advice for parents that are kind of staying in a pod that want to expose their children still to diversity and ethnicity in an authentic way?
Yeah, one of my favorite things is food. Food is really a great way, especially here in the US. I mean, we have everybody that's so many people from so many different cultures. And granted, depending on where you live, you may have more of a particular culture, but ordering a particular dish and researching it and telling your children where it's from and how they make it, or watching a video on YouTube, and so there's definitely ways that you can do it. I think food is really one of the easiest ones, especially for your junior high and your high school kids. Those are great ways to do it. And even some elementary kids. I mean, you can definitely do it with sweets and treats and where it comes from. Those are great ways to kind of begin to engage them, to get them talking about what they might know, so that hopefully when things open back up, they can kind of look with a different set of eyes. So food is a great way. Increasingly more, there are a lot of cartoons that seem to, whether it's the character or whether it's the characters or the content or both, sometimes they have messages in them. And so, that's another way. But my first and favorite is food. My first and favorite is food. But I definitely think that, cartoons and videos, and there are a lot of ways to do it, but those would be my first two.
Thank you. Yes, we have, food is a great way. How about you, Carolyn?
Yeah, I'd say food, and also music. It's fun to hear like popular music, as well as traditional music from different cultures. So kids can envision like, what are other people like grooving to, or, and even that dates me, I'm so not cool. But just thinking, I remember the Putumayo Presents, having so many different albums out that would have like a Caribbean Playground that had a bunch of kids tunes that all were from Caribbean musicians, and so different styles of music, that we had a Putumayo jazz music, jazz album, again exposing our kids to different jazz famous artists and musicians. So just thinking about resources that are providing, I mean, and those were CDs. So now you can do it all digitally. Now my kids are, 14 and 10. But letting people appreciate the different instruments and the different ways that tonalities even that are used by different cultures, again, just helps you appreciate it. And also to do some of the critical thinking. So, we were watching a Chuck Berry video, and it was filmed in Germany, this like 30-minute Chuck Berry video, which was amazing, of this live concert. But my husband was pointing out to my kids that, like, yeah, Chuck Berry had a lot of racist experiences, whenever he'd play, like in the United States, he'd have to go in on certain entrances and, wouldn't be able to stay the night in some towns. And, so again, that critical reflection to say, look at how some musicians are treated on the stage compared to how those same people have been treated in our society when they come down off the stage. And also how some musicians, while they have written this original music, they're later not given credit, or their music is taken and adopted by a white singer or white musical group. And now everybody loves this white musical group that's become popular. Why is that? Why did the original singer not get the same amount of credit and fame as a result of their work? So again, doing that critical work of talking with your kids, naming that, so that historically they're coming with this background of like, oh yeah, things aren't fair, and we can be part of that difference. We can be part of this effort to try to make things more fair for everyone.
Right, that's such a good reminder too, that this framework isn't just for, it's great to apply it to people and situations, but you can also apply it to food. Like, why was I awkward and why did I back away from that dish? What was I trying to control? And exposing yourself, or to music. Why did I automatically think because of the cover, maybe I wasn't going to like that music? But if I dug into it and went past the first ABCs, I can experience something new. So yeah, thank you for that. Those are really great suggestions. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Like, what do you hope would be the one key idea from the book that people carry with them after reading it? This will be one of the last questions.
If I may, I'm a preacher and I teach preaching. And so part of me is like, I really want to make sure people hear this. But some of the ways that our kids today are different, like kids who are sexed one way as they come out as babies, but inside their gender is something totally different. The differences that kids are experiencing these days, kids that are growing up in black and brown skin in a society that continues to target kids as young as 12 with Tamir Rice as somehow criminals and worthy of being gunned down. When we live in a society where so many kids' differences make them at higher risk for an early death, it makes it all the more crucial that we have these conversations with our children, that we have these conversations as adults with one another, that we have these conversations in our communities and in our legislative structures, so that we can start to make that difference, so we can start to make it safer for everybody. The risk of suicide among kids and youth who identify as LGBTQ is, I think, something like 4 or 5 times as high as that of straight kids. So these differences aren't just out there, they're in our homes, they're in our own families, they're in our schools. We had somebody commit suicide at our local high school last year. And so it's just really important that we have these conversations, and we have them in our faith communities too, whatever religious groups, because it's often those religious communities that are saying certain messages about people needing to be certain ways without celebrating the rich diversity all around us. So it's really important that we carry this message home. So I'm going to take myself out of the pulpit now and step back on the ground and still have this conversation with you. But I had to get that out before we close.
I think that, you know, no one is immune, right? I think that's the key idea, is that, you know, no one is immune, and that it takes all hands on deck. Like, everybody can play a part, everything, and that you start with where you are. So, our children are not immune. They either are going to consciously or unconsciously perpetuate and participate in actions that, you know, are not toward inclusivity, or unfortunately they'll be on the receiving end. But we can make a change, we can do something different, we can break that, you know, cycle, that binary, by trying to be intentional. And that like I said, everybody can, it takes all hands on deck, and that people can just start with where they are. And I think those three things are most important, that none of us are immune. It takes all hands on deck, and then people can start with where they are.
Those are great. Thank you. Those are both great thoughts to leave us with. Thank you so much. So I just want to let everybody know too that you can check out the ABCs of Diversity at the library, lapl.org, either as an ebook or placing a hold on a physical copy using your library card. Even though our branches are not yet open, you can place a hold and pick up materials at selected branches. And we have the link Library to Go right on the bottom, and the ABCs of Diversity. So thank you again to Dr. Y. Joy Harris-Smith and Dr. Carolyn B. Helsel for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
It was great.
Thanks for having us. And those worksheets that Joy showed at the beginning, those are available at the chalicepress.com website of the book. And I think the librarian, somebody we spoke to earlier, said they're going to make it available on the library website too.